Our protagonist had been humiliated his entire life until one day, he had enough. He started throwing punches and his strength skyrocketed from 3 to 245, then 4,500 until he finally mastered the art of the punch with a perfect 9,999 points. If you're curious, subscribe to the channel now, and let's dive into this insane story. The story begins with a car driving along the road while a boy plays on his phone. His name is Gilson, and his parents urge him to stop staring at the screen. He ignores them, focused on his game. As they continue along the road, the car enters a dark tunnel, and his mother insists that he listen to his father and put the phone away. His father, watching through the rearview mirror, sighs, while Jusu thinks to himself that his father probably regrets having him as a son. He knows his parents are aware that he gets bullied at school, but their words feel empty. His mother tries to reassure him, saying that if the students harass him again, he should just give up. All she wants is for him to have a peaceful life. Jusu scoffs at her words, calling her a liar. He reminds her that she begged his father to transfer him to another school, but they ignored his struggles. With no response from them, he returns to his game. But when he loses, he stares at the game over screen, wondering if maybe he should end everything right now. The scene shifts to the gates of Six Portals High School, where Jusu walks alone, wishing he could run away. He even prays for an earthquake to stop him from entering. He introduces himself as Lee Jilsu, but before he can even finish his thoughts, something unexpected happens. The moment he steps onto campus, all the students begin clapping. Shocked, Jilsu looks up and realizes that everyone is welcoming him. They cheer, saying it's cool to have a student from the big city. Later that day, another student approaches him, bringing a friend along. Jilsu immediately assumes the worst, expecting another round of bullying. But instead, the student casually places a hand on his back and introduces himself as Deal. He invites Jilsu to go to the store with him, saying he wants to show him around the school. Completely taken aback, Jilsu realizes this is the first time he's ever been invited anywhere by classmates. As they walk together, Deal jokingly comments on Jilsu's eyebrows, saying they look like Rock Lee's. Jilsu, a little embarrassed, admits that he thinks they have their own charm. For the first time, he starts to wonder why everyone here seems so friendly. Maybe, just maybe, he could have a normal life in this place. But then, as he accidentally bumps into another student, a familiar feeling of fear grips his chest. The student looks at his soaked shirt and pauses. Jilsu, panicked, quickly apologizes, saying he'll clean it up. To his surprise, the student just smiles. "It's fine," he says. Jilsu stands there, completely stunned. Is this really happening? Could he really live a peaceful life here? As the school bell rings, signaling the end of classes, Jilsu reflects on how different this school feels. The fear that had weighed him down for so long suddenly seemed unnecessary. For the first time in his life, he feels happy about transferring. Shortly after, Deal approaches his desk, asking if he has any plans for the evening. When Jilsu says no, Deal excitedly invites him out. As they walk through the city at night, Jilsu starts to notice how far they've been walking. Curious, he asks where exactly they're going. Deal simply smirks and says it's a place every newcomer has to see. Jilsu starts to feel uneasy. The deeper they go, the more he starts to think something bad is about to happen. Then, Deal asks, "Have you ever practiced boxing?" Jilsu hesitates, replying that he has no experience with fighting. Deal laughs. "Then you'll need courage for what's coming next." He picks up the pace, urging Jilsu to hurry up because they're almost there. That's when Jilsu notices something unsettling. Deal's body is covered in scars. Immediately, memories of his past bullying experiences flood his mind. A terrifying thought races through his head. Is Deal about to attack him? Panic sets in, and Jilsu abruptly stops walking. He says he needs to leave, right now. But before he can turn back, Deal grabs his shoulder. "We're almost there," he says. "Just take a quick look." Jilsu hesitates. Feeling defeated, he follows Deal to an old warehouse. The moment they step inside, a deafening roar fills the air. Jilsu flinches. His instincts tell him to shut his eyes, to brace for something horrible. But when he slowly opens them, he sees something completely unexpected. A massive underground fight club. The warehouse is packed with students, all cheering and shouting as fighters go head-to-head in brutal battles. Jilsu's eyes widen in shock as he watches a fighter get hit with a devastating spinning kick. Deal chuckles, clearly enjoying Jilsu's reaction. "Welcome," he says, "to the school's underground fight arena." Jilsu stares in disbelief. Fighters aren't just beating each other senseless, they're helping each other up after every match. Before he can fully process what's happening, a deep voice calls out. Someone is looking directly at Jusu. A tall, intimidating figure steps forward. The man asks Deal who the newbie is. His name is Jang Chung, the president of the school. Deal responds, saying that Jusu just transferred today. But even he can't help but think, this guy looks way too old to be a student. Rock Lee immediately challenged Deal to a fight in the ring, declaring that he would get revenge for the joke about his cat paw eyebrows. Without hesitation, Deal accepted the challenge. As the two prepared to fight, Chung turned to Jusu, introducing himself. The size difference between them was massive, leaving Jusu speechless. Chung welcomed him to the school as the students cheered excitedly. Meanwhile, Jill and Rock faced off in the arena. Still confused, Jusu couldn't understand why they were fighting if they were friends. Chung laughed, saying that the freshmen weren't bad. Jusu, still trying to make sense of everything, attempted to process the situation. Chung then explained the true nature of the school. This wasn't bullying, it was violence. But it was violence with rules. The main rule was that all fights must happen inside the arena. Chung, now looking Jusu straight in the eyes, claimed that he could tell Jusu had suffered from bullying. He suggested that he release some stress here because inside the arena, everyone was equal. The glow in Chung's eyes as he spoke about violence and order was intense. Continuing, he said he didn't like long explanations, so Jusu should listen carefully because he would only explain once. Rule number 1. Only students from 6 portals high can participate. Once someone graduates, gets expelled, or drops out, they are banned from entering the arena. Rule number 2. All fights must be one-on-one. No weapons allowed. Rule number 3. The school's disciplinary council acts as referees. Suddenly, a voice called out from the crowd. It was the cafeteria guy. He spotted Jusu and demanded to know where he had been. Jusu immediately recognized him. The cafeteria worker then challenged Jusu to a fight, saying it was to make up for the cleaning fee for his shirt. Chung grinned, saying that it looked like Jusu had already found an opponent and that he would soon learn by experience. Meanwhile, Rule number 4 stated that violence outside the arena was forbidden. If someone had an issue with another student, they had to settle it inside the ring. The final rule was simple. Just have fun and don't be afraid to enter the arena. Jusu couldn't believe what he was hearing. How could he possibly enjoy something like this? The referee raised his hand, signaling the start of the match. Jusu stared at his opponent, frozen. His instincts, honed by years of bullying, screamed at him to run. As the students continued cheering, some whispered that Jusu had the worst possible luck. His opponent, Kin, was infamous for his brutality. Kin grinned, looking at Jusu. He offered him a chance to attack first, saying he'd give him an advantage since it was his first fight. But Jusu was paralyzed by fear. Seeing his hesitation, Kin smirked. "If you're not going to take the chance," he said, "then I will." He launched himself at Jusu. Jusu shook with fear. Tears filled his eyes. The crowd's excitement shifted to pure disgust. All eyes were on Jusu. And then Jusu threw up, everywhere. The crowd burst into laughter. Kin stopped mid-attack, shocked. He sighed, asking for a towel to clean up the mess while the students continued laughing hysterically. Meanwhile, Jusu, humiliated and defeated, muttered to himself, "I've never thrown a punch in my life. I don't even know how." The scene shifted to the school bathroom. A group of students chatted about the arena fight, laughing about how humiliating it was. Sitting alone in a stall, Jusu listened to everything they said. "I'm screwed," he thought. He had expected this school to be normal, but now he realized it was anything but. Even though Chung told him to enjoy it, Jusu knew he never could. He could already imagine what tomorrow would be like. But there was no escaping it. At least here, he couldn't be bullied outside the ring. He just had to keep moving forward. The scene changed once again. Chung was doing push-ups with 2 students on his back. He had already done 999 reps and was struggling to complete the last one. Jusu, watching from a distance, couldn't believe what he was seeing. How is this guy even a high school student? Chung noticed Jusu staring and asked if he had something to say. Jusu hesitated, but then he spoke up. He had a question about the arena. Chung grinned, mocking him. "Do you have any skills other than vomiting?" Ignoring the sarcastic remark, Jusu said he was serious. He wanted to know if he could be exempt from fighting in the arena. The room fell silent. Chung narrowed his eyes. "Why?" he asked. You weren't even injured in that fight. Jusu lowered his head. I don't have an ounce of confidence. I don't hate anyone. I don't see the point in fighting. In fact, I don't even understand the purpose of the arena at all. Chung placed a firm hand on Jilsu's shoulder. A chilling smirk crossed his face. That means, he said, I can beat you up as much as I want. Jilsu, confused, asked what he meant. Chung didn't bother explaining. Instead, he declared something shocking. As the president of this school, I officially announce that Jilsu is not protected by the arena rules. The school routine continued as usual, but Jilsu was filled with dread about what would happen next. His worst fears came true when Kong appeared, claiming he had heard about Jilsu's decision to not participate in the arena. Without warning, Kong grabbed Jilsu and slammed his face into a desk. Laughing, he mocked him, saying he would teach him what that decision really meant in this school. Kong declared that he needed a slave, and from now on, Jilsu belonged to him. The other students ignored the scene entirely as Jilsu was struck in the face again. Kong admired his own strength, and another student casually commented that he had heard Jilsu transferred schools because of bullying. One of Kang's friends laughed, saying that it made perfect sense, since Jilsu was nothing but a coward. With a smug grin, Kong ordered Jilsu to report to his class during every break from now on. Jilsu, unable to stop the tears from falling, was kicked repeatedly in the back of the classroom. The scene shifted to the teacher's office. Jilsu was sitting across from a teacher, explaining that he wanted to drop out of school. He calmly stated that he had been preparing for this and that he would only take the necessary exam to receive his diploma. His expression was drained of all hope. He lowered his voice and apologized quietly, not to the teacher, but to his own family, for having such a useless son. Leaving the school, Jilsu walked through the gates, convinced that his school life was finally over. But before he could take another step, Chung appeared, blocking his path. The student president stared him down, demanding to know why he wasn't fighting. Jilsu hesitated, then lowered his head. I'm sorry, he muttered. He admitted that someone obsessed with fighting like Chung would never understand what he felt. He revealed that he had severe trauma from violence, that he had been relentlessly bullied, and that now he simply wanted to quit. He had tried everything, but nothing changed. Chung placed a hand on his shoulder. Then, with absolute coldness, he said, You're even more pathetic than I imagined. Jilsu looked up, confused. What do you mean? He asked. Chung didn't answer. Instead, he walked toward him. Who said you need to fight like a professional? If you have no teeth, use your gums. If you have no strength, use your courage. That's what fighting truly means. He grabbed Jilsu by the collar, looking him in the eyes. Do you really not even want to protect yourself? Jilsu choked back tears, whispering, What did I do wrong? Chung clicked his tongue. You really think the world out there is all sunshine and rainbows? If you keep living like this, you'll be prey for the rest of your life. Jilsu walked home alone, muttering to himself. Chung would never understand. He had never been weak. Jilsu was exhausted. He just wanted to give up. But then, someone stepped out of the shadows. A mocking grin spread across their face. They had been waiting for him. The student sneered, saying he heard Jilsu wasn't coming to school tomorrow. Then, in a low, threatening tone, he asked, How could you leave without saying goodbye? His voice turned menacing. If you leave, who's going to be my punching bag? Ever since Chung created the arena, he lost his slaves. So now, he needed someone new to take out his frustrations on. Jilsu was a fool if he thought leaving school would solve everything. The student ordered Jilsu to follow them. The scene shifted to a dark alley. Jilsu lay on the cold ground, barely conscious, as the bullies mercilessly kicked him. He felt like he was about to die. All he could think was, Please, just let it stop. One of the students laughed, saying Jilsu should feel lucky. If this were back when Kang's older brother was in school, you'd already be dead by now. Then one of them casually asked if the address they got was correct. Jilsu's body stiffened. His mind raced. What are they talking about? One of the bullies grinned, saying he couldn't believe Jilsu lived in such a nice house. Then he read Jilsu's address out loud. He smirked and declared, Next time we'll pay you a visit. The group laughed as they started to leave. Jilsu, desperate, pushed himself up, demanding to know what they planned to do to his home. But the leader just smirked. Stay still, he said. I'm going to take a picture and send it to everyone. Jilsu's heart pounded. His breath grew ragged. What did I do to deserve this? He thought it was over, that he had finally escaped this nightmare. But just when he felt free, he got dragged back in. Chung's words echoed in his mind. Fighting isn't just about strength. Jusu realized how much of a coward he had been. He never even tried to fight, not even to protect himself. One of the bullies grabbed his face. Jusu let out a piercing scream of pain. They laughed, telling him to hold still. Jusu, in despair, screamed again. What did I do wrong? In one sudden movement, Jusu knocked the bully's phone to the ground. The screen cracked instantly. The student stared at it in shock. Jusu, without thinking, lunged forward and bit down on his hand with everything he had. The bully howled in pain. Jusu, breathing heavily, muttered to himself, I'm weak, but if that's the case, I'll do whatever it takes to fight. He vowed to resist, with everything he had. The bully, enraged, punched Jusu in the face. But to everyone's shock, Jusu stood up again. The bully, now genuinely shaken, whispered, This guy has lost his mind. Jusu, panting, simply smirked. You're right. For the first time in his life, he was ready to fight. Jusu felt a surge of determination coursing through his veins. If he was going to die here, he would make sure to take that idiot down with him. His attacker laughed, surprised at his sudden defiance, commenting that even a cornered rat would bite back. The others closed in, but Jusu refused to retreat. Desperate, he grabbed a handful of dirt from the ground and flung it into their eyes, shouting for them to get away. Blinded and furious, the bullies stumbled back, realizing Jusu had scooped up the dirt when he had fallen earlier. Enraged, they shouted for the others to chase him down. Jusu sprinted, running without direction, his instincts guiding him blindly. Somehow, his feet carried him back to the one place he never expected, the underground fight arena. As the door swung open, Chung stood there, his eyes narrowing in intrigue as Jusu walked in, his gaze filled with raw determination. The surrounding students fell silent, stunned by his return. Without hesitation, Jusu declared his intention to fight in the arena. His pursuers stopped at the entrance, unsure of what to do now. Chung, watching the scene unfold, smirked in amusement. Jusu was proving to be far more interesting than he had originally thought. Inside the ring, Jusu stood, bracing himself for what was to come. One of the bullies, a stocky student named Park Yango, stepped forward with a sneer, claiming that he would personally deal with this nerd. Another student warned him to lower his voice, reminding him that Chung was present. Yango waved it off, saying he was well aware and always made sure to be cautious. Without hesitation, he launched a punch straight into Jusu's face, followed by a brutal knee to the stomach. Kong mocked him, asking if he really thought he could accomplish anything here. Without giving him a chance to recover, Kong struck again, causing Jusu to stumble. Taking advantage of his imbalance, Kong lifted his leg and delivered a powerful kick to his face, taunting him about learning his place. Laughing, he asked Jusu how it felt now. Despite the pain, Jusu glared at him with unyielding anger, a look that only infuriated Kong further. He demanded that Jusu lower his gaze, insisting that losers should behave accordingly. This wasn't some webtoon fantasy, this was reality. Kong turned to the crowd, mocking the situation, asking if they agreed. Then, with a spinning kick, he sent Jusu crashing to the ground. The spectators gasped, murmuring about how intense the fight was. Some wondered if Jusu had broken a rib. Kong, still brimming with excitement, hoped that he wasn't dead just yet. Struggling, Jusu tried to rise to his feet, and Kong was taken aback. He should have been unconscious by now. He scoffed, telling him to stop acting tough or he would end up dead. Jusu, still panting, muttered that this pain was nothing compared to what he had endured his entire life. Fueled by sheer will, he charged forward, managing to tackle Kong to the ground. The crowd erupted in shock, calling him Vomit Boy, but admitting that he had some fight in him after all. Kong, still on the ground, grudgingly acknowledged that he had been caught off guard. Jusu, gritting his teeth, let out a roar and went in for another punch. But before he could land it, Kong struck first, knocking him back. Kong ridiculed him, saying his slow punches would never land. In that moment, Jusu recalled Chung's words. Without thinking, he lunged forward and smashed his forehead into Kang's nose, drawing blood. The crowd exploded with excitement, exclaiming that this fight had become far more entertaining than they had expected. Chung observed closely, noting that even with adrenaline dulling his pain, Jusu had clearly suffered significant damage. However, what stood out most was his resilience. It was truly impressive. Kong, enraged, kicked Jusu away, sending him sprawling. Wiping the blood from his own face, he demanded to know if Jusu had a death wish. Even so, Jusu struggled to his feet, unwavering. For the first time, he questioned if he had been wrong about everything. Had the gangs he feared so much really been this powerful? He clenched his fists as the students began chanting his name. Determined, he charged at Kong, swinging with all his might. He mimicked the legendary one-punch style, but just as he was about to strike, everything went black. His consciousness faded as Kong sneered, declaring that he wouldn't be caught off guard again. Jusu collapsed to the ground, unconscious. The referee stepped in, announcing Kong as the winner. That night, Jusu woke up, sore and battered but strangely proud. He had finally defended himself. He reminisced about the moment he had landed that one hit, but regret crept in. He hadn't kept his composure. If only he had been a little stronger. His mind wandered, analyzing what he could have done differently to win. He wondered if there was any way to improve. Suddenly, Chung appeared beside him. His presence was calm yet commanding, and he asked if Jilsu's mind was clearer now. Jilsu looked around, realizing they were alone. Confused, he asked if Chung had come specifically for him. Chung replied that, as the student president, it was his duty to ensure that no one suffered serious injuries. The arena existed to protect students, not destroy them. However, he reminded Jilsu that what had happened tonight had been an exception. From now on, he was no longer allowed to enter the ring, because he was on the verge of leaving the school. Chung turned to walk away, but Jilsu, desperate, called out to him. He needed to know what to do next. Chung paused, his expression unreadable, asking what Jilsu meant. Steeling himself, Jilsu declared that he wouldn't quit school. He begged to know what he had to do to become stronger. His mind drifted back to where it all began. A single flying sandal had accidentally hit someone. At first, it seemed like nothing would come of it. But then, everything changed. The other students exchanged glances, and before he knew it, they were all attacking him, demanding money. That was when it happened. He had been branded a failure. They laughed as they kicked him, saying that people like him existed only to be beaten. That was the moment he realized his place in the world. Until now, Jilsu remembered that this was how everything had started, but this time he refused to give up. Watching him closely, smirked, acknowledging that as the student president, it was also his duty to train the weak. Without hesitation, he stepped toward Jilsu and, without warning, delivered a devastating punch to his stomach. The force sent shockwaves through his body, making him gasp and spit blood as he collapsed, writhing in pain. Chung, unfazed, commented that it must be agonizing, but this was only the beginning. He promised that he would make Jilsu strong enough to withstand even harsher blows. The next day, Jilsu still felt the intense pain radiating through his core, leaving him in awe of how absurdly strong Chung truly was. He recalled Chung's instructions, telling him to seek him out during break periods. He questioned whether this brutal training would actually make him stronger, but before he could dwell on it, Deal called out to him, asking if he had finally given up. Jilsu, standing firm, replied that he had changed his mind. Deal chuckled, teasing that he must have started enjoying the arena, joking that it took real courage to keep going. Just then, Kong appeared, making Jilsu tense up as he heard his mocking voice calling him a punching bag. He was fully aware of Kang's strength, and hearing him sneer about how he hadn't expected to see him back only made Jilsu more resolute. Kong questioned if Jilsu was back for revenge, warning him to remember his place because next time, he might not leave in one piece. As they walked past each other, Deal noticed the subtle trembling in Jilsu's hands, not out of fear, but from barely restrained fury. Jilsu had made up his mind. He would become strong enough to never lose to lowlifes like Kong again. On the rooftop, Jilsu stood, absorbing hit after hit. His training was relentless. Chung delivered a brutal punch to his face, followed immediately by another blow to his stomach. He barked at Jilsu to keep his eyes open and focus on his fists, forbidding him from entering the arena until his training was complete. Jilsu protested, demanding to know how this could even be considered training, but his words were ignored. Days passed, and the same routine continued, one devastating blow after another. A powerful left hook knocked him back, followed by a swift kick that sent him flying. Jilsu groaned in frustration, realizing this felt more like a beating than actual training. Meanwhile, in the ring, Kong stood victorious over yet another opponent, his presence becoming more ruthless since his fight with Jusu. Spectators whispered that his ego had taken a hit after that battle, and it was clear that he had been merciless ever since. Some joked that his newfound weakness was headbutts and vomit, which only infuriated Kong further. He turned to the crowd, issuing a challenge to anyone who dared to test his so-called weakness. His opponent immediately backed off, apologizing. Kong stormed through the gathering students, calling them all idiots before turning to his friends, asking if any of them had seen Jusu today. They responded that he had been absent during breaks and had also avoided the arena. That made Kong suspicious. He thought of Chung and grinned. He had just come up with a perfect way to vent his frustration. That night, Jusu ran laps around the track, utterly exhausted. The bruises and pain from his training throbbed through his body, but he refused to stop. He replayed every hit, every fall, and every failure in his mind, questioning whether this method would truly make him stronger. Regardless of his doubts, he resolved to push himself even harder. Suddenly, the roar of a motorcycle approached, and before he could react, the vehicle brushed roughly against his shoulder. The rider skidded to a stop, immediately complaining that Jusu had scratched his bike. He got off, demanding compensation for the repair. Jusu, still catching his breath, stared at the man in disbelief. How could he expect him to pay for something that wasn't even his fault? He pointed out that the rider had hit him, not the other way around. The man grabbed Jusu by the hair, calling him a loser before delivering a powerful punch to his face. His companions laughed, claiming they had all witnessed Jusu running straight into the bike. Jusu, bewildered, demanded to know what was going on, but the man continued pressuring him, insisting that he pay up. Jusu, however, felt something strange. He wasn't afraid. The threats, the aggression, none of it intimidated him anymore. The man kept pushing, demanding Jusu hand over every cent he had, but instead of backing down, Jusu suddenly recalled all the brutal training sessions he had endured. He had been taking beatings from a true monster every single day. Without a second thought, he shoved the man's hand away and retaliated with a punch straight to his face. The impact sent a satisfying shock through his knuckles as he demanded to know why he should pay when he wasn't even afraid of this guy. The man, stunned for a brief moment, grabbed Jusu's wrist and laughed mockingly, asking if that weak punch was supposed to be a real attack. Jusu's mind raced. Why hadn't his punch done anything? He clenched his fists, realizing he was still too weak. The onlookers watched in shock as Jusu suddenly started swinging his arms wildly, yelling as he spun them in circles. He had no proper fighting technique, no experience. He only knew how to take a beating. His erratic movements made his opponents hesitate, confused by what they were seeing. The man scoffed, accusing Jusu of putting on some kind of comedy act. His friends burst into laughter, mocking that he looked like a windmill or a drowning swimmer. The man cracked his knuckles, flashing a sinister grin as he signaled for his friends to hold Jusu down. He declared that after tonight, Jusu would learn how to behave properly. He ordered him to grit his teeth, winding up his fist for a devastating punch. But before he could land it, a sudden impact sent him stumbling backward. A powerful knee strike had crashed into his face out of nowhere. Jusu, momentarily stunned, turned in shock as he recognized his savior. It was Deal. Deal, smirking, glanced at Jusu before chuckling, seemingly amused by the situation. He found it ironic that the person he had just rescued turned out to be Jusu of all people. Before the gang could react, one of their members lunged at him, but Deal dodged effortlessly, countering with a precise left hook to the attacker's jaw. Another thug, armed with a wooden plank, charged in, but Deal raised his arm, blocking the blow with ease before retaliating with a brutal strike. The gang member crumpled instantly. A girl among the group screamed in horror as she realized that all of her companions had been knocked unconscious. Jusu watched in awe as Deal effortlessly dismantled the thugs, realizing that he had completely underestimated him. He had thought Deal was just another ordinary student, but now he saw firsthand just how powerful he really was. The girl who had been with the gang tried to put on a brave front, warning Deal that he had no idea who he was messing with. She boasted that they were part of the strongest first years from Dial High School. However, one of Deal's friends, Sanal, interrupted her, telling her to drop it. He explained that picking a fight with them would only make things worse for her side. Then, turning to Jusu, he revealed that he was actually from the Six Gates School. He had been wondering why Jusu had been acting so differently lately, but now it all made sense. he had messed with the wrong people. The gang members, realizing the situation, immediately jumped onto their bikes and fled. As they sped away, Jusu stood there, calling them idiots before turning back to Deal, who now looked at him with curiosity, asking how he had gotten himself into trouble with them in the first place. A short while later, Jusu explained everything to Deal, detailing the special training he had been undergoing with Chung. Deal was visibly surprised, acknowledging that if Jusu was training under Chung, then he must be serious about learning how to fight. Jusu confirmed this but admitted that he was still far too weak. He had been training his endurance when the thugs had attacked him, and he hadn't been able to defend himself properly. Deal laughed at the memory of Jusu wildly flailing his arms like a maniac and called it quite the spectacle. However, he did give him credit for his courage. Despite being completely outmatched, he hadn't backed down. That said, he warned Jusu that he was still nowhere near strong enough to take on multiple opponents at once. He explained that if he had been in Jusu's position, he would have dodged the attack and countered effectively. But at the same time, he admitted that he envied Jusu for being personally chosen by Chung. For someone who had outright rejected the arena, Jusu needed to start adapting to the school's environment. After all, this school was unlike any other. Jusu's mind wandered back to what Sanil had said earlier, that the gang had fled after discovering Deal was from 6 gates. He asked Deal why that had scared them so much. Deal responded that it was obvious 6 Gates School had a reputation. Jusu pressed for details, and Deal explained that the school had a long history of extreme violence. In the past, it had been nothing more than a lawless jungle where chaos ruled. Jusu, skeptical, commented that it didn't seem that way now. Deal agreed, explaining that it was all thanks to Chung. Chung had taken control of the school and established the fight arena, implementing strict rules. Over time, the school became more structured, as the arena provided an alternative way for students to release their aggression. However, Deal warned that if the arena were to disappear, or if Chung were to lose his influence, the order they had built would crumble, and the school would revert to the anarchy of the past. There were still people who longed for the old days, eager to return to that violent era. Inside the arena, the atmosphere was tense as another student was knocked to the ground. Yongo loomed over him, mocking him and asking if that was all he had. Without giving his opponent a chance to recover, he pointed at another student and ordered him into the ring, claiming that he had picked him simply because he didn't like his face. The student hesitated, clearly intimidated, but Yongo pressed him, demanding to know if he was going to refuse. Kang's group watched with amusement, commenting that Yongo was completely out of control today. Kang himself sat back, unimpressed, calling the weaker students losers who needed to learn their place. When Yongo delivered a final devastating kick, his opponent collapsed instantly, unable to continue. Kang, now bored, stood up and ordered everyone to clear the way. He wanted to have some fun as well. His expression darkened as he declared that he was going to teach these cowards a real lesson. Back in the present, the arena fell silent as Kang stepped forward. The students murmured among themselves, wondering who his next opponent would be. Kang scanned the crowd before pointing directly at one of the students who had been talking about him earlier. He ordered the boy to step forward immediately. The student, clearly shocked, asked why he had been chosen, but Kang dismissed the question entirely, saying he didn't need a reason. He was simply in a bad mood. Grabbing the student by the collar, Kang yanked him forward and sneered, demanding to know if he intended to refuse the fight and end up just like Jusu. Before things could escalate any further, Chung stormed into the arena, his presence radiating pure authority. He looked visibly irritated as he locked eyes with Kang, demanding to know what was going on. Kang, unfazed, casually replied that he had simply issued a fight challenge, and there must have been a misunderstanding. He then boldly turned the tables, asking Chung directly if there was a problem with that. He was careful with his words, emphasizing that he had not broken any of the established rules. He wasn't technically forcing anyone to fight, just encouraging them in his own way. Flashing back to an earlier moment, Kang sat with his friends, discussing his plan. He pointed out that Jusu had complicated things for himself by being the first student to outright reject the fight arena. As long as a person had working arms and legs, they could fight. That was the foundation of the arena. Everyone was equal in violence. Those who watched from the sidelines could pretend to be superior, but in the end, they were just cowards who enjoyed spectating. Kang's friends nodded in agreement, saying that they had been having fun so far, but Jilsu's actions had brought too much attention to the situation. They worried about what would happen if others followed his lead and started questioning the system. Yango chimed in, saying that if that happened, students would be forced to fight just to avoid being treated like Jusu. Kong agreed. He declared that from now on, the arena would be their playground. Returning to the present, Kong continued pressing Chung, maintaining that he hadn't broken any rules. He smirked, asking once more if there was a problem. But before he could push further, Chung shut him down, telling him to drop the bravado. Kong, sensing that he had tested his luck enough for now, backed off slightly, apologizing for the confusion and claiming that next time, he would be more careful with his selections. High above the arena, on the rooftop of the school, Chung's relentless training continued. He delivered a flurry of powerful blows to Jusu, his punches landing with brutal precision. Jusu struggled to keep up, each strike leaving him gasping for air. With one final, devastating kick, Chung sent him flying across the rooftop, ending the session with a single, overwhelming strike. After that, Jusu feels like he's going to die, but he manages to regain his balance and block the strike, realizing that he's not as scared as he used to be. Chung acknowledges that he's getting used to it now, but when Jusu attempts to retaliate, Chung easily dodges and reminds him that if he wants to win, he needs to land an actual hit. Frustrated, Jusu throws another reckless attack without a plan, making Chung even more irritated. Without hesitation, Chung delivers a sharp slap and orders him to stop messing around. Jusu immediately feels the sting of the slap, noting that it hurt more than usual. Chung explains that he needs to learn how to fight properly. If he does, he might even be able to win his next fight. They move to an old arcade club, a place that Jusu immediately finds outdated and wonders why they are even there. As he steps inside, he notices a bald man that some might recognize as Bob. Chung instructs Jusu to raise his fists to his chin, tuck his jaw, and align his feet shoulder-width apart. He walks him through the technique, explaining that a jab should be thrown cleanly, and for a straight punch, he must rotate his hips, shoulders, and legs to generate power. Jusu listens attentively, realizing that the sound of a well-executed strike is sharp and impactful, almost like a gunshot. Confident, he tries it himself, throwing a jab followed by a straight punch, convinced that he's getting the hang of it. However, when he looks at the score, he sees no real improvement. Chung points out that the arcade machine won't register a hit unless it has real impact. If Jusu wants to defeat his opponents, he needs to generate enough force to truly damage them. He instructs him to find his own way of fighting and not to show himself again until he achieves the highest score possible. The scene then shifts to a different moment, where Jusu is on his phone, and his girlfriend tells him they should stop seeing each other. Confused and frustrated by the sudden change in her attitude, he walks absent-mindedly through the hallway and bumps into Yango. He quickly apologizes, but Yango, smirking, pushes him forcefully to the ground, causing his phone to fall and shatter. Acting as if it was an accident, Yango dismisses the situation, but Rock immediately notices that it was intentional. Yango, sensing the tension, taunts Jusu, asking if he has a problem and suggesting they settle it in the arena. Rock, feeling intimidated, hesitates and nervously admits that it was his fault. The group laughs it off, saying that it was just an accident, not a case of school violence, and warns Rock to be more careful next time. Later, Jusu sits in the cafeteria, eating aggressively while mumbling about how hungry he is and his frustration with being unable to increase his score. Yango suddenly appears, fake apologizing before dumping a plate of food on Jusu's head. Laughing, he mockingly asks where Jusu has been hiding, saying he has been missing from the usual school spots. With a casual slap on Jusu's back, he keeps hitting him, pretending to be friendly. Meanwhile, outside the cafeteria, Yango and his gang discuss how they just intimidated Rock without any consequences. Kong, growing more amused, suggests that it's time to do the same to Jusu and show him who's in charge. Yango confidently takes responsibility for handling it, telling the others not to interfere and to trust him. Back in the cafeteria, Yango grabs Jusu's wrist, squeezing it tightly. Jusu, now enraged, feels the frustration boiling inside him, but he remembers that Chung has banned him from the arena until he completes his training. He clenches his fists, knowing he has no choice but to obey. Jill, watching the scene unfold, suddenly tells Yango and his group to shut up because he's trying to eat. Without hesitation, he throws his lunch tray straight into Yango's face. Shocked, Jusu watches as Jill calmly states that one shouldn't disturb a dog while it's eating. The cafeteria goes silent. Jill, still smirking, tells Jusu that he needs to understand his place, while Yango, humiliated, demands to know if Jill has lost his mind. Jill simply shrugs it off, claiming it wasn't school violence. His hand just slipped. But if Yongo wants to fight, he'd be more than happy to settle it in the arena today. Later, Jill helps Jusu with his clothes while they wash them. Jusu thanks him, but Jill clarifies that he didn't do it specifically for him. Even though it might seem that way, he just wanted to correct the imbalance in the arena. He's tired of seeing them abuse the system. Since he hasn't been in the arena for a while, he's unsure of the exact situation, but he knows that Yongo and his crew have been deliberately targeting weaker students. When the victims get scared, they use Jusu as an example to justify their dominance. However, Jill has yet to fight against them, so this will be the perfect opportunity. Jusu, still puzzled by Jill's involvement, asks why he even cares about the arena. If he's so strong, why should it matter to him? Jill's expression darkens, and a flashback plays. He was once different, overweight and timid. As a kid, he was bullied severely, and one day, his tormentors forced him into a filthy puddle, laughing as they ordered him to drink the dirty water like a pig. He resisted, but they grabbed his face, forcing him down. Just as he was about to be humiliated, a large hand grabbed one of the bullies, lifting him off the ground. Afterward, Jusu thanks the man, admitting that he doesn't even know who he is. The man, without much explanation, hands him a small piece of paper and asks if he wants to try boxing as a way to stay in shape. Turns out that this man is the director of a local boxing gym. Out of curiosity and with nothing to lose, Jill steps into the gym for the first time and quickly becomes obsessed with the sport. He trains relentlessly, losing weight and improving his strength and endurance. Over time, his body undergoes a complete transformation thanks to boxing. The same bullies who once tormented him are now the ones lying on the ground, defeated. Shocked, the students who used to push him around now scramble to apologize, realizing they underestimated him. Even those who acted like kings in the school hierarchy were nothing more than weaklings when faced with someone who had truly trained. Jilu watches everything unfold, stunned, unable to believe that Jill, once a victim of bullying, has become a force to be reckoned with. Jill, now confident, acknowledges that the rules of the arena created by Jung are a bit extreme, but he still enjoys the idea that people have the freedom to fight and choose their opponents. With a determined expression, he declares that he's going to defeat Yuo, and Jusu should come to watch. Later that night, inside the arena, the atmosphere is tense as Jill and Yuo stand face to face. Yuo smirks, questioning where Jill suddenly found the courage to challenge him. Unshaken, Jill remains focused, ready to prove himself. The fight begins as the referee signals the start, and Yuo immediately throws a jab, but Jill effortlessly blocks it, surprising him. He follows up with another series of jabs, but Jill dodges them with ease, moving swiftly. The students watching are stunned at his speed, wondering if he is purely a boxer. Jill begins pressuring Yuo, forcing him to back away while maintaining precise footwork. Yuo, annoyed, mocks his speed, saying that fast punches mean nothing if they lack power. He retaliates with a powerful punch, claiming that strength is what truly matters, but Jill sees it coming and blocks it effortlessly. Jill counters with another jab, but Yuo dodges and attempts an uppercut. However, it was all part of Jill's plan. He sets Yuo up perfectly and lands his own uppercut, striking cleanly. Realizing he was tricked into the attack, Yuo finally understands that Jill was intentionally luring him in. Jusu watches in disbelief, amazed that Jill is completely dominating the fight. So far, Yuo hasn't been able to land a single clean hit. The crowd starts whispering that Yuo, who has remained undefeated until now, might actually lose this fight. Frustrated, Yuo tries an overhand punch, but it misses. He follows with a right hook, misses again. A left hook, misses once more. Panic starts setting in as he realizes he can't land a single hit. Meanwhile, Jill grins and begins taunting him, asking if he really thought those weak punches would work. With a perfectly timed jab, Jill lands a direct hit on Yuo's face, explaining that light punches are necessary to set up the heavier blows. Then, he delivers a powerful right straight, sending Yuo staggering to his knees. Looking down at him, Jill mocks his earlier arrogance, telling him that for someone who talked so much, he really wasn't doing much in the fight. He orders him to stop bothering people and leave the arena. However, Yuo isn't ready to give up just yet. Looking toward Kong with a smirk, he assures him not to worry. He has no intention of walking away. Admitting that Jill is the superior boxer, Yuo reveals that he never intended to play by those rules in the first place. Without hesitation, he lifts his leg and shifts into a Muay Thai stance, announcing that now the real fight begins. Recognizing the stance immediately, Jill realizes Yuo is preparing to use kicks. As Yuo advances, he delivers a swift low kick aimed at Jill's legs, but Jill stands his ground and blocks it with his shin. The impact surprises Yuo, who winces from the pain, wondering why Jill's stance feels so solid. He attempts another strike, but Jill smartly maintains his distance. Refusing to let the momentum slip, Jill closes in and throws a direct punch, but Yuo sees it coming and moves to counter. However, this time Jill is ready. Yuo instinctively raises his arm to block, but the moment Jill's fist collides with it, he regrets it. The sheer force makes it feel like he was hit by a steel beam, sending him flying across the ring. Struggling to recover, Yuo questions why Jill's punch carried so much power, even though he blocked it. But Jill isn't finished yet. As Yuo tries to regain his footing, he launches another powerful low kick. Yuo raises his arms to block, but this time, the result is disastrous. The moment Jill's shin collides with his forearm, an audible crack echoes through the arena. Jusu watches in horror as Yuo's arm bends unnaturally, the clear sound of a fracture silencing the once rowdy crowd. Jill instinctively backs away to give himself more space, while Yuo, now clutching his broken arm, grins through the pain. Still, he refuses to back down. Laughing maniacally, he demands that Jill bring everything he's got. Jill, however, remains composed, realizing that Yuo's kicks are on a completely different level than his punches. If he gets hit again, it could be even more dangerous. But while he is lost in thought, a sharp fist suddenly strikes him in the face, sending him reeling. Before he can recover, another punch follows, then another and another, until Jill finds himself overwhelmed by a relentless barrage of attacks. Yuo, now grinning wildly, celebrates that his punches are finally landing. Jill realizes his mistake. He was so focused on Yuo's kicks that he neglected to defend against his punches. Before he can adjust, Yuo lands a heavy low kick, sweeping Jill off his feet and sending him crashing to the ground. The arena falls silent as Yuo towers over him, still laughing. Looking down, he taunts Jill, mocking him for ever thinking he had a chance. He questions what gives someone as weak as Jill the right to lecture others about the arena's rules. As Jill struggles to get up, Yuo steps forward and, without hesitation, swings his foot forward, preparing to land a brutal soccer kick directly to Jill's head. Jusu could do nothing but watch helplessly as the decisive blow was about to land. His fists clenched in frustration as Yongo's foot swung forward toward Deal's head. However, just before impact, the referee intervened, blocking the kick with his shin. The crowd fell silent for a moment before the referee firmly declared that continuing to attack an opponent who was no longer in fighting condition would be considered a violation. The fight was over. The referee's name was Jinam, and his presence alone commanded respect. Yongo, despite being stopped, simply laughed. He was clearly having fun, unfazed by the outcome. He remarked that things were just getting interesting and that it was a shame the fight had to end there. However, for the first time in a while, he had truly enjoyed himself. His eyes shifted toward Jusu, studying him with intrigue. With a smirk, he commented that perhaps this was why certain people from his past had resurfaced. He chuckled to himself, predicting that the arena was going to become even more exciting in the near future. He then advised Jusu to come by more often, implying that this was only the beginning of something much bigger. Some time later, Jusu was helping Deal walk, supporting him as they left the arena. Deal, wincing in pain, was more frustrated than anything else. He wasn't just upset about losing, he was furious that he had given Yongo the satisfaction of a victory. Jusu reassured him, pointing out that he had been dominating the fight at first, but once the kicks came into play, everything had changed. Deal nodded, admitting that Yongo's kicks were far stronger than he had expected. However, there was something off about that final kick, something unusual that he couldn't quite put his finger on. They eventually reached their destination, and Deal, exhausted, thanked Jusu for helping him. He offered to get him some water before heading home, but Jusu refused, stating that he had something important to do. Deal was surprised, questioning what Jusu could possibly have planned at this hour. However, Jusu simply nodded and walked off without giving much explanation. Deal watched him curiously, wondering what exactly he was up to. Meanwhile, in a classroom, a pair of the ugliest shoes imaginable rested on the floor. Kong, looking unimpressed, asked why they had been brought to him. One of his gang members explained that it was a gesture of appreciation from their group. However, Kong dismissed the idea, stating that talent was far more valuable to him than gratitude. The gang member then reassured him that if that was the case, there would be no issues. They would simply have to prove themselves through their actions. They pledged to do their best from now on. At that moment, Yongo entered the room, casually remarking that Jusu probably wouldn't be showing up at school today. Kong immediately perked up, questioning what he was talking about. Yongo smirked and suggested that it was probably about time they paid Jusu a visit. Kong placed a hand on Yongo's shoulder, explaining that the situation had changed. Thanks to Yongo's victory over Deal, they had now proven their strength. Those who once doubted them now feared them. If they continued to target Jusu, it would only ruin their reputation. One of their members asked what the next move was. Should they start spreading flyers to recruit more people? Kong shook his head, stating that they had already taken down the first-year students as planned. Now, it was time to move on to the next phase. Outside, a group of older students stood smoking, their intimidating presence casting a shadow over the area. They were introduced to Sun Shoku, a notorious figure. Someone asked who they were, and their leader responded that they had come because they wanted to meet them. One of the older students scoffed, dismissing them as freshmen and questioning why they even bothered to show up. Kong, unfazed, explained that they weren't just any freshmen. They were part of the legendary generation that once belonged to his older brother. Upon hearing this, Shoku's demeanor shifted. He narrowed his eyes, realizing exactly who Kong was. Kong then pointed out that, now that they had been abandoned by Chung, they were merely lurking in the shadows like forgotten relics. Infuriated, Shoku grabbed Kong by the throat, demanding to know what he was implying. Kong, remaining calm, stated that he was simply expressing his disappointment. He acknowledged that Shoku must have felt like he was fighting alone, but that was no longer the case. The situation had changed. Shoku hesitated, processing Kang's words, unsure of what he was getting at. Meanwhile, at the underground fight club, Hang was speaking with Chung, expressing his concerns. He argued that if they continued allowing people to abuse the arena's rules, it would eventually undermine everything they had built. They couldn't just stand by and watch as immaturity threatened the very foundation of their system. Hang then brought up Kang's older brother, stating that his influence was still lingering. However, Chung remained firm, asserting that even if they intervened and resolved the issue now, the arena would never return to what it once was. Hang considered this for a moment, realizing that Chung had a point. Just then, Chung's phone rang. When he answered, he was surprised to hear Jilsu's voice. It was an unexpected call. From the background noise, it was clear that Jilsu was at an arcade, standing near one of the punching machines. Chung, already skeptical, reminded Jilsu that he had explicitly told him not to contact him until he had accumulated some real experience. He questioned whether Jilsu was calling to give up. Jilsu, however, had other plans. He calmly stated that his reason for calling was exactly why he needed to reach out. The camera panned to the punching machine, revealing that Jilsu had shattered the high score. The screen displayed an impossible number, 99,999. Blood stained the machine's surface, evidence of Jilsu's relentless determination. He had surpassed his limits. He then spoke into the phone, his voice filled with conviction. He was ready. He demanded that Chung teach him the next lesson. At the same time, Gilson was running toward the arcade, his mind fixated on Yongo. He needed to hurry, he needed to grow stronger. Without hesitation, he threw a powerful strike at a training dummy, his fist landing with a resounding impact. Sweat dripped from his face, but he refused to slow down. He knew that he had no other choice. He had to push himself beyond his limits, because right now, there was nothing left for him to do but keep fighting harder than ever. Jilsu knew that if he kept punching the machines tens of thousands of times, he would eventually achieve his goal. He recalled Chung's words about needing to hit hard enough for the machine to register his punch. Only then would he prove that he could inflict real damage on an opponent. The issue wasn't just power, it was also weight and technique. To maximize his strength, he widened his stance, allowing for a full-body motion. He threw a punch directly at the training dummy's face, and a loud thud echoed through the room. The counter began rising 3 points, then 20, then 134. It climbed steadily, surpassing 4,000, and kept increasing. His fists began to bleed, the skin tearing open from the relentless impact, yet he pushed through. Finally, he struck the machine one last time, and the score flashed 99,999 points. He had done it. Breathing heavily, Jilsu turned to Chung and demanded to be taught the next stage of training. Chung smirked, admitting that Jilsu had progressed faster than expected. Jilsu, still panting, explained that he had no choice. He had no time to waste. Chung nodded, acknowledging that this urgency was a good thing. Now they could move on to the next phase, but he warned that it would be far more difficult. As he spoke, Jilsu's body gave out, his head falling forward onto Chung's chest. The exhaustion had finally caught up to him. Chung chuckled, remarking that rest was also an important part of training. Before Jilsu could respond, he lost consciousness, his body completely shutting down from the strain. The following night, at the fight club, Yongo looked around at the gathered crowd and asked if this was really everyone. Someone responded that not even half of the usual participants were present. Yongo scoffed, questioning whether people were actually afraid. A voice from the back challenged his assumption, and a figure stepped forward. The man was Shuei, a second-year member of the student council. He declared that the first years needed to be taught a lesson. Yongo, slightly caught off guard, observed the situation carefully. Shuei made it clear that he hated the dragon tattoo on Yongo's arm and that it was reason enough for a fight. Apparently, Yongo had been picking fights over petty reasons all along, and Shuei wasn't about to let it slide. Meanwhile, Hang, watching the escalating tension, muttered that they could no longer afford to sit idly by. He vowed that from now on it would be an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. The arena doors creaked open, and another presence entered. Goku, a notorious upperclassman, stepped inside, surveying the atmosphere. He had heard rumors that the fight club had been getting more intense lately, so he had come to see it for himself. Hang was immediately on edge, surprised by Choku's sudden appearance. Choku, however, seemed unfazed, remarking that he hadn't expected to see a second year picking a fight with a first year. He teased the idea of making things more exciting. Hang, angered by Choku's casual attitude, strode toward him, demanding to know how he dared to show his face there. Choku, smirking, simply responded that he was still a student at the school, just like everyone else. Hang wasn't buying it. He reminded Choku of the past incident he had caused, calling him out for acting as if nothing had happened. Choku, still grinning, suggested that they just forget about the past and move forward. Another figure, Inin, chimed in, questioning why Hang was being so uptight. He pointed out that fewer people were showing up at the fight club lately, so it was good to have new participants. Didn't Hang agree? Hang, glaring at him, clearly did not. Meanwhile, at a construction site, Jilsu hesitated, wondering what kind of training awaited him there. He muttered about how dark and eerie the place was, even joking that a ghost might pop out at any moment. Chung, standing nearby, remained serious. He explained that Jilsu needed to find his own path. Confused, Jilsu asked what exactly the training would entail. In response, Chung asked if he had ever heard of the old Six Gates School. He elaborated that schools in the Jongyong area often competed for dominance, but one school, Six Gates, had crushed the competition, securing complete control over the region. Once Six Gates had solidified its rule, the other schools scattered, returning to their original territories. Jilsu was unsure what this history lesson had to do with him, but before he could ask, Chung revealed something even more shocking. The construction site where they stood was the territory of Jenong Technical School. Although large-scale fights between schools no longer took place, if a student from another school trespassed, it would be considered a direct provocation. Jilsu's eyes widened as the realization sank in. Without warning, Chung slammed a door shut, locking Jilsu inside. He pointed toward another exit on the far side of the area and told him that if he wanted out, he would have to find his way there on his own. He explained that there was no better training than real combat experience. Jilsu panicked, banging on the door, demanding to know why he was doing this. Before he could get an answer, the roar of motorcycles echoed through the site. A group of bikers approached, and a rough voice asked who was making such a racket in their territory. Jilsu's heart pounded as he recognized one of the men stepping off a bike. It was none other than Sanel, the same guy he had encountered before. Sanel also recognized Jilsu immediately, a grin spreading across his face. He had known the name of Jilsu's school sounded familiar. Laughing, Sanel commented on how lucky he was to meet Jilsu here, especially under these circumstances. With a sinister smile, he remarked that Jilsu must be fearless to have entered their territory alone. Slowly, he slipped on his brass knuckles, just as he had done before. Jilsu, frozen in place, remained silent. Sanel then grabbed the back of Jilsu's head and leaned in close, mockingly asking if he was scared. Jilsu found himself in a tense standoff with Sanel, who was now rubbing his brass knuckles against Jilsu's face, warning him to start talking before things got ugly. But as he did so, he noticed Jusu mumbling something under his breath. Confused, Sanal pressed harder, demanding to know what he was saying. The words became clearer. Jusu was mentally reciting the fundamentals of a proper punch. Raise the fist to the chin, align the feet with shoulder width, keep the steps light, and then, in a split second, he launched a jab straight into Sanal's face. The impact was clean, precise, and unlike anything Jusu had delivered before. Taking a step forward, he followed up with a powerful straight punch, striking Sanal much harder than anything he had ever thrown. Blood spewed from Sanal's mouth as his gang members watched in stunned silence. Jusu, feeling the rush of power surge through him, smirked. This time, it was working. Meanwhile, in the fight club, a desperate student pleaded with Choku not to let someone leave. Choku, unimpressed, remarked that had he known the underground arena was this entertaining, he would have joined in sooner. He mocked the student council, noting how weak they had turned out to be. Referring to Troy, he scoffed that the guy's mind must be broken after that fight. Hang, standing nearby, warned them not to take things too far in the ring. He suggested that if Choku wanted to prove himself, he should fight someone on his level instead of gloating. Choku, however, was only amused by Hang's frustration, dropping Troy's limp body on the ground as he casually pondered his next move. With most of the students already having fled, it was clear only two factions remained, his group and the student council. They all agreed that the remaining fighters had vanished, likely avoiding becoming the next targets. This, of course, played right into Kang's plan. Smirking, Kang suggested that if they really wanted to settle things, they should set up a proper confrontation in a different location, rather than waste time fighting in an empty arena. He reasoned that there was no longer any need to protect the space. Hang clenched his fists, his frustration growing, but before he could respond, Choku cut in, ordering him to listen carefully and make sure Chung knew as well. Hang's anger boiled over, but before he could act, the situation outside took a dramatic turn. Jusu had just sent one of Sanal's men flying with a body shot, his strength catching everyone off guard. Another lackey rushed him, furious that Jusu had managed to humiliate their leader, but Jusu didn't flinch. Smiling cockily, he absorbed the weak punch, taunting that their attacks were too feeble to even hurt. Then, without hesitation, he countered with a devastating strike to the stomach, launching his opponent backward. A third challenger stepped up, eager to prove himself, but Jusu accepted the fight head-on, delivering a single knockout punch that sent the attacker sprawling. The gang members stared in disbelief. Was this really the same Jusu they had humiliated before? A female member of the group broke the silence, calling Jusu an idiot and warning him that he had no idea what he had just done. Behind her, more reinforcements gathered. It was clear Jusu was in deep trouble now. A new voice joined the chaos as a strange-haired boy mocked Jusu for stepping onto their turf. He barked orders to his crew, telling them to wipe him out. Jusu's confidence wavered for the first time as he realized he was outnumbered. There were too many of them. Fighting them all at once was impossible. He needed a plan. The woman sneered, asking if he had finally grasped the reality of his situation. But just as she finished speaking, Jusu suddenly leaped onto Sanal's parked motorcycle. The woman's eyes widened in shock, shouting at him to get off, demanding to know what he thought he was doing. Jusu, however, had no intention of riding away. He had something else in mind. Revving the engine loudly, he sent the motorcycle speeding forward, without him on it. The unexpected move sent the gang into disarray as they scattered to avoid being hit. Using the distraction to his advantage, Jusu charged forward, catching the strange-haired boy, Kang Suk, off guard with a brutal punch to the face. He barked at Suk to get out of his way, but there was no time to celebrate. His enemies quickly regrouped and shouted for his capture. Without hesitating, Jusu sprinted as fast as he could, knowing that he had to keep moving. If he could face them one by one, he might have a chance. For a brief moment, he found himself longing for the safety of the underground arena, but then an idea struck him. Even outside of the ring, he still had a chance. His eyes locked onto a long flight of stairs leading up to a high platform. This was it. He bolted up the steps, his pursuers hot on his heels. Just as they thought they had him cornered, Jusu stopped abruptly at the top of the staircase, turned around, and launched the first attacker down the stairs with a single punch. The others hesitated, but their hesitation was their downfall. Jusu took advantage of the high ground, knocking down each enemy as they foolishly charged at him. One after another, they tumbled down the stairs, groaning in pain. Watching them fall, Jusu grinned. This was it. If he kept luring them into a disadvantageous position and striking them down one by one, he could handle them all. He wasn't just fighting. He was using the battlefield itself to win. Jusu's plan to use the staircase as an advantage quickly crumbled when a flying bowl of ramen struck him directly on the head. At the same time, a man who had been leaning casually against the railing leaped into the air, delivering a powerful kick to Jusu's face. The impact was brutal, sending him tumbling backward down the stairs, straight into the hands of his enemies. The gang members rushed to their leader's side, calling out to him. Irritated, the veteran fighter groaned, complaining that he had just been enjoying his meal when some lowlife from 6 gates suddenly appeared to ruin everything. Dazed and still struggling to process what had just happened, Jusu muttered that he hadn't expected anyone to be stationed on the upper floors. But he didn't have time to hesitate. Determined not to go down without a fight, he pushed himself up and charged directly at the new challenger. The veteran barely looked surprised. In fact, he seemed almost bored as he swiftly intercepted Jusu's charge with a devastating knee strike straight to the face. The force of the impact was unlike anything Jusu had felt before. This guy wasn't like the rest of the small-time thugs. He was the real deal. The veteran, still visibly irritated, issued a simple order. They had 10 minutes to finish Jusu and drag him over. Without hesitation, the gang members surged forward, swarming Jusu from all sides. Fists rained down on him, kicks struck his ribs, and every attempt he made to defend himself was met with overwhelming force. The veteran leaned back against the railing, still seething over his wasted ramen, and suddenly changed his mind. He reduced the time limit to 5 minutes, warning that if they didn't get the job done, they would all pay for it. Jusu struggled to keep his footing as the relentless barrage continued. His entire body ached, his muscles screamed in protest, and yet, through sheer willpower, he forced himself to stand. His legs trembled, his vision blurred, but he knew one thing: staying here meant certain defeat. Meanwhile, the veteran overheard one of his men cursing about how useless the rookies were, which only fueled his frustration. With no other options, Jusu made a desperate move. Summoning every ounce of energy left in his body, he lunged forward and hurled himself down the stairs like a bullet. The veteran barely had time to react before Jusu grabbed him by the head and delivered a savage headbutt. The sheer force of the impact sent them both rolling down the staircase in a chaotic mess. The gang members gasped in shock before rushing down after them. They found the veteran groaning in pain, struggling to get up. He pointed a shaking finger at Jusu, fury in his eyes, and barked out an order: capture him at all costs. If they failed, everyone would be in serious trouble. But Jusu, despite his injuries, laughed. He had done it. He had managed to break free. Now all he had to do was reach the back exit. Sprinting as fast as his battered body allowed, he made his way toward the gate. Just as Chung had told him, it was wide open. Victory was within reach, or so he thought. A deep, rumbling sound filled the air. The unmistakable roar of a motorcycle engine echoed through the lot. Jusu turned his head, his heart sinking at the sight before him. A man with wild green hair came speeding in, dragging an unconscious Sanal behind him like a ragdoll. The stranger's expression was twisted into something between amusement and disgust as he let the lifeless body drop onto the pavement. Sneering, he muttered that he couldn't believe his men were losing to a weakling like Jusu. Then, as if his personality wasn't disturbing enough, he licked his lips and grinned, calling Jusu cute and admitting that he had a soft spot for adorable things. Jusu, still gasping for breath, could only stare in disbelief. Who the hell was this lunatic? The man finally introduced himself: Ha Kwang, the leader of the school. Jusu's mind raced. This guy had to be the top dog of the gang, their absolute strongest. His instincts screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. He quickly assessed Huang. He was shorter than Chung and didn't look as muscular. Maybe, just maybe, he could win. Deciding to strike first, Jusu launched into the signature combination Chung had drilled into him. 1-2, a fast jab-straight combo that worked against almost any opponent. Except this time, it didn't. Huang dodged effortlessly. His movements were precise, fluid, and impossibly fast. Then, without missing a beat, he lunged forward, still smirking, and called Jusu adorable again. Before Jusu could react, Huang executed a flawless double-leg takedown. Jusu's world spun as he was lifted clean off the ground, only to be slammed violently onto the pavement. The impact rattled his entire body, stealing the air from his lungs. Dizzy, barely conscious, he felt himself being grabbed again. Huang wasn't done. Still grinning, he muttered that he couldn't let Jusu pass out just yet. He wanted to play a little more. With terrifying ease, he lifted Jusu once again and executed a devastating suplex. Jusu's skull cracked against the concrete, blood spraying from his mouth upon impact. The gang members erupted into laughter, reveling in the brutality of the moment. Only one person wasn't laughing, a boy with violet hair standing in the back. Scowling, he told the others to shut up. Unlike them, he knew what was coming next. Jusu, barely clinging to consciousness, felt his body being lifted once more. Huang's grip tightened around his throat, and his voice was almost casual as he asked if Jusu was already out cold. Then suddenly Jusu's foot shot up. He managed to land a weak kick to Huang's face. It barely did any damage, but the sheer audacity of it was enough to make Huang pause. Coughing up blood, Jusu mumbled something under his breath. Huang's expression darkened. Had he heard that right? Jusu, still grinning through the pain, repeated himself. Why does someone like you call others cute? You're the one who looks like a damn kid. The gang fell silent. The violet-haired boy whispered under his breath that Jusu might have just signed his death sentence. Everyone knew the unspoken rule: never, ever mention Huang's height. When he was younger, he had been mocked endlessly for it, and now he was absolutely enraged. Jusu barely had time to process what was happening before Huang seized him once more, tightening his grip like a vice. Murmuring under his breath, Huang declared that this time, Jusu was going down for good. Within seconds, Jusu found himself trapped in a brutal triangle choke. His limbs were immobilized, and the pressure on his neck made it impossible to breathe properly. Panic surged through his body as he realized that no matter how much he struggled, he couldn't move. Huang smirked, clearly enjoying himself, and thanked Jusu for becoming his new plaything. From the sidelines, the violet-haired student observed the scene with a grim expression, noting that Huang's technique was known as the infernal triangle choke. Anyone caught in it was completely defenseless. As if to prove the point, Huang delivered a brutal strike to Jusu's head, mocking him and demanding he repeat what he had said earlier about him being cute. Jusu, gasping for air, understood that this fight was on an entirely different level than anything he had faced before. For the first time, he genuinely feared that he wouldn't make it out alive. Spectators watched in shock, their eyes wide as Jusu resisted the chokehold with sheer determination. He refused to fall here. Huang, clearly entertained, twisted his position mid-air and tightened his hold, adjusting for an even stronger submission. With an unsettling grin, he whispered that Jusu was his now. Jusu's vision darkened, his lungs burned, and his body screamed for oxygen. Huang smugly remarked that the school record for passing out from this chokehold was 7 seconds, and he was eager to see how long Jusu would last. Desperately trying to resist the overwhelming force, Jusu realized that his muscles were giving out, his legs were failing, and unconsciousness was closing in fast. With a triumphant smirk, Huang declared that Jusu was finally back to being adorable. Still gripping his prey, Huang began dragging Jusu's limp body across the ground, announcing that he was going to take him somewhere more private to continue playing. The once terrified students, who had been dreading Huang's unpredictable wrath, now let out a collective sigh of relief. It seemed that, for now, they were safe. However, just as Huang was about to leave with his new toy, something unexpected happened. Jusu's eyes shot open. He was still conscious. A flash of memory surfaced. His past tormentors used to play a sick game called the fainting game, where they bet on how long he could endure suffocation before losing consciousness. To survive, he had learned a trick, pressing his pinky finger against his carotid artery to control his blood flow. It was a desperate method that changed each week as his abusers adapted. But now, that painful past had given him an edge. As his blurred vision sharpened, Jusu's fingers frantically searched the ground. His hand closed around something solid, a rock. Huang heard a sharp noise and turned to see what it was, but it was already too late. Jusu swung the rock with all his remaining strength, smashing it directly into Huang's face. The impact sent a sickening crack through the air as Huang staggered back, blood spraying from his nose. The shock caused him to loosen his grip just enough for Jusu to break free. Wasting no time, Jusu scrambled to his feet and ran for his life, finally seeing his chance to escape. The exit was right there. Just a few more steps and he'd be free. But Huang wasn't about to let him go so easily. With a terrifying snarl, Huang turned his gaze toward Jusu, his previously playful demeanor now twisted with pure rage. With unnatural speed, he dashed forward, closing the gap between them in seconds. Jusu's mind screamed in disbelief. How was he still moving after taking a hit like that? The gate was just ahead. He had to reach it. Then, suddenly, a powerful voice echoed through the area, cutting through the chaos. That's enough. Jusu's legs nearly gave out. The air around them shifted as a towering figure stepped into view. It was Chung. A cold chill ran down Huang's spine as he registered the presence of the school's strongest fighter. His usual confidence wavered as he instinctively felt the overwhelming pressure exuding from Chung, who stood tall, arms crossed, his piercing gaze locked onto him. There was no amusement, no playfulness, only irritation. Chung issued a final warning. Any further attack would be considered an act of war against Six Gates. Jusu looked down and realized something. He had already crossed the school's boundary. He was officially outside enemy territory. Huang, shifting his weight from foot to foot, felt something he wasn't used to: hesitation. The presence of Chung was unsettling, but instead of backing down, he started bouncing on his feet like an excited predator. He muttered that he had suspected Jusu was special, but he hadn't expected someone like Chung to show up as well. With a gleeful grin, Huang declared that it didn't matter. The era of Six Gates was over. This was now Jiang Hai's time to rule. Chung didn't bother with a response. Instead, his fist answered for him. The impact was thunderous. The sound of the punch landing echoed like a gunshot. Huang was sent flying backward, his body twisting midair before crashing to the ground. Several of his teeth scattered across the pavement. Chung glanced down at his unconscious opponent with mild disappointment, remarking that, as expected, Jiang Hai's students hadn't improved in the slightest. Jusu, still panting, forced himself to lift his head. He had never seen Huang, someone who had toyed with him so effortlessly, be defeated in a single hit. Chung turned his gaze toward Jusu and, with an approving nod, stated that he had officially passed the second stage. Now only the final test remained. Jusu's breath hitched. The last stage. Chung instructed him to meet him on the school rooftop the next day. The ultimate lesson would be waiting for him there. Determined, Jusu clenched his fists. He had come this far. There was no turning back now. The following morning, however, Jusu wasn't on the rooftop. Instead, he was in the school corridors, loudly challenging someone to meet him in the arena after class. It seemed he still had unfinished business before his final lesson. In a flashback, Yango could be seen taunting Deal, mocking his injured arm. He questioned whether Deal was truly hurt or just faking it out of fear of fighting again. The battle wasn't over yet. Jusu stood his ground as Yango mocked him, prodding at his chest and ridiculing him for all the bravado he had shown back in the cafeteria. With a smug grin, Yango shoved him down, sneering that he finally understood his place. Without hesitation, he stomped on Deal's cast, grinning as he questioned whether his arm was really broken. Deal, clenching his teeth, shot back that Yango was breaking the school's rules, but Yango simply grabbed him by the collar and laughed, saying that no one cared about the rules anymore, especially since barely anyone even went to the arena these days. Before he could land another blow, Jusu came charging in, blocking Yango's attack and catching him off guard. The confrontation now led up to the moment where Jusu had challenged Yango to a fight in the arena, deciding that there was no more time for training. It was time to prove himself. Yango chuckled, calling him Vomit Boy yet again. He then grabbed Jusu's bandaged arms, speculating that he had been training alone, thinking he could finally stand up for himself. But before Yango could tighten his grip, Jusu swiftly pulled away, surprising him. With unwavering confidence, he issued his challenge. Yango grinned, amused by the sudden shift in Jusu's demeanor. He taunted him, claiming he had no idea where all this courage had come from but admitted that it seemed entertaining. He took a step back, telling Jusu he was interested, and that he looked forward to teaching him what the arena had become lately. With that, he walked away, stating that he would be eagerly waiting for him. Meanwhile, on the rooftop, Chung stood with his arms crossed, waiting for Jusu, confused by the delay. Suddenly, the door burst open, and Jin Nong stormed in, demanding to know where he had been the night before and if he even knew what had happened in the arena. It was clear from Chung's expression that he had no idea. Jin Nong filled him in, explaining that Choku had shown up at the arena and warned that things would only get worse if the current state of affairs continued. He urged Chung to act fast, but the leader simply smiled, finding it interesting that Choku had finally appeared. Frustrated, Jin Nong questioned why Chung seemed so indifferent when the arena was on the brink of collapse. He pressed that if things continued this way, the arena would be ruined for good. But Chung, unfazed, responded that if the arena was truly so fragile that it could be dismantled by something so trivial, then it deserved to fall. He explained that the reason the arena had functioned so well wasn't because he had controlled it with rules. It was the opposite. It had been allowed to regulate itself. He likened it to a polluted river that naturally purifies itself over time. If the arena could be reshaped by just one person's influence, then that meant the situation was fluid. But if it remained unchanged, then it had never truly had a purpose to begin with. Meanwhile, back in the classroom, Ranit turned to Yongo, confirming that Jusu had indeed challenged him. Yongo smirked and affirmed it, saying Jusu must have lost his mind. He also noted that Jusu's arms were wrapped up, meaning he had clearly been training. But Yongo was confident that he would end this once and for all. Ranit, however, appeared deep in thought. Yongo noticed and asked if something was wrong. Ranit responded that at this stage, getting involved with a loser like Jusu wouldn't bring them any benefits. The real priority was taking down Chung. Yongo brushed off the concern, assuring him that there was nothing to worry about. He vowed to break one or two of Jusu's arms so that he would never interfere again. He insisted that winning was a given, but what really mattered was how others would perceive the fight. After everything they had done to establish their power in the arena, he needed to secure an absolute victory, no mistakes. He had to be flawless. Later that day, outside the school, Rock confronted Jusu, demanding to know what he was thinking by challenging Yongo. Even he had lost to that guy, so what was Jusu planning to do? Jusu realized that he had acted impulsively. Was it really okay for him to ignore Chung's final lesson just to fight? Rock advised him to back out immediately. Even with Chung's training, facing Yongo was still too dangerous. Jusu, however, was resolute. Deal had gotten injured protecting him, and what had happened in the corridor that morning was just another reminder of what he had always been used to, being ignored, turned into a spectacle, and treated like a circus act. He refused to let that happen anymore. His first real opponent had to be Yongo. He had to finish the fight that he couldn't back in the cafeteria. No matter how dangerous it was, he was sure that this time he was ready. That night, the arena buzzed with energy. The news of Jusu's challenge had spread, and a massive crowd had gathered. Rock noted that he had never seen the place so packed since enrolling. Jay remarked that Jusu's presence in the past two fights had made a serious impact. This was what made the underground arena so exciting. It wasn't about being strong or weak. It was about stepping into the ring and proving yourself. Yongo, standing in the ring, scoffed as he leaned against the ropes, commenting that Jusu was late. His friends started laughing, suggesting that maybe Jusu was too scared to show up. Yongo grinned, saying that if Jusu really knew what was good for him, he'd run away, though it wouldn't matter, because they could always finish him off outside of school. Meanwhile, Chung observed the arena quietly. Some students in the crowd began murmuring, wondering when the fight was actually going to start. Yongo laughed, telling everyone that they had been fooled. Jusu wasn't coming, and they should all just give up on waiting. Rock, standing among the spectators, frowned, wondering if Jusu really wasn't going to show. Just then, the doors creaked open. Rock turned around, eyes widening as Jusu stepped into the room. With a firm voice, Jusu asked why he should ever consider backing down. The entire crowd fell silent before bursting into murmurs of shock. Jusu had shaved his head completely. He stood tall, looking more confident than ever, and declared that for the first time, he actually felt like it was worth coming to school. Yongo tried to hold back his laughter, but soon his face twisted as he burst out, tears forming in his eyes from how ridiculous he thought Jusu looked. He mocked him, asking if he actually believed that cutting his hair would change anything. The other students in the arena joined in, pointing and laughing at Jusu, calling him crazy. However, watched silently from the side, a smirk forming at the corner of his lips. Jusu, unfazed by the laughter, simply told them to enjoy it while they could, because soon they wouldn't have anything to laugh about. Yongo, still amused, reminded him that Deal had also been confident at the start of his fight, and look how that turned out. He told Jusu that he was about to face the same fate. Jusu clenched his fists and stepped forward, declaring that from this moment on, he was going to beat Yongo down. Hangin raised his hand, signaling for them to get ready. Jusu, fists raised and eyes burning with determination, declared that the old version of himself was gone. No matter what it took, even if he had to risk everything, he was going to win. And with that, today's recap comes to an end. If you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a comment below and let me know if you want a part 2. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.